I'm just blabbering a bit just to make sure we've actually gone live. I think we are now live on Facebook and Instagram and everywhere else. I lose track of all the places you can be live these days. We are talking today about really important stuff, which is we talked about hiring in general, but we're talking today about SOPs. What are they? Why do you need them? And how on earth do you manage them? So we're talking with a real expert in this area, Trent Dersmit, who has built a tool specifically for this whole thing. So it's dedicated. He's Mr. SOP. So Trent, welcome back to the show. Good to have you on.
Michael, thank you to have me here again. And let me just clarify what we're really talking about isn't SOPs. What we're really talking about is how to create more freedom in your business, how to make more money and have less chaos. That's what we're talking about. SOPs, they're just the vehicle that's going to get you to that destination.
Perfect.
And it's not even so much SOPs as it is systems.
Systems, amazing.
Systems are the vehicle that will get you there.
Amazing.
And not every entrepreneur gets excited about systems, but everybody gets excited about making more money, having more freedom, and building a business that your team can run without you having to babysit them every day.
Amazing. Well, look, this is beautiful content, so I better get recording the podcast. Otherwise, you're going to have to say half of that again. But you're absolutely right. Sell the sizzle, not the steak. The results, not the SOPs. So you've already given us great value. So let's get cracking with the podcast recording. Ladles and Jenna Spoons, welcome back to the 10K Collective, place for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers. Today, we're talking systems. And I introduced this on the live by saying that we've got Trent Dersmit to talk about SOPs. And he quite rightly corrected me and said, we're really after freedom and more cash, and systems are just the way to get it. So very important corrective. So Trent, welcome back to the show, first of all. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you as well. Always a very smart guy I learn a lot from. So I've given away the kind of, the punchline, as you rightly put it. It's about the end result. It's freedom. So I guess that tells us kind of one reason to have systems. But what is a system anyway? Is it a bunch of, Google documents with a few scribbles on, or a bunch of recordings of you tapping away at your computer? And, what is that an SOP? What are we even discussing here?
Sure. So systems is a pretty ambiguous word. Systems can be super complex, like software or a Tesla assembly line. Those are systems, but not easy to build. But they can also be simple, like a checklist. But the goal in either case, whether it's complex or whether it's simple, the goal is you want to reliably and predictably produce a specific outcome. That's what a system is. So simple example, recipe for a cake. I want a chocolate cake. I never cooked a chocolate cake before. If you tell me to wing it, the results are going to be questionable. And if you have 20 people on your team and you tell them to all go bake a chocolate cake, you're going to end up with 20 very different chocolate cakes, which is a quality control issue. On the other hand, if you give everybody on your team the recipe and say, follow the recipe, make the chocolate cake, more or less, the chocolate cakes are all going to turn out to be about the same, and your customers who are buying your chocolate cakes are more or less going to be a whole lot happier than the wild, wild west that would have happened if you didn't give everybody a recipe.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's some management thing that somewhere that defines quality is variance, really. So in other words, variability, I guess random variability. Now, if you're working at the really high end, I guess my classical music background would defend against that. But, that super high end sort of stuff, when you deal with mass produced things or a system like a software, you probably don't want it to go all artistic and produce a randomly varied result. So that's very, very important. Now, so that tells us why it's important. When do we need to start thinking about this? I mean, is it before you even, make a dime on Amazon? Is it when you got to a certain level? I guess it's kind of a how long's a piece of string question, but let's ask.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I would encourage people to think about. First off, let's just look at the departments in a typical company. Most companies, regardless of what they do, they're going to have marketing, they're going to have sales, they're going to have fulfillment, and they're going to have administration. Each of those departments could realize significant benefits from having systems in place. And it's up to the CEO to decide, where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? And so I can't tell people, because it depends upon where in the life cycle your business is. For example, one business might be struggling to attract customers, and they have so they have a lack of growth. So their fire, as it were, is a lack of growth. But another business might be selling like crazy and really struggling at consistent fulfillment. So their chaos, their fires are in fulfillment. So those two founders shouldn't be focused on the same area. So that's a decision that you need to make, but I can give you some guidelines. So first of all, let's just take a step back out of the departments for a minute and think about, well, when should I create a system? Here's 3 things that you should get a yes to every time. Does it take longer than 5 minutes to do? Do I have to do it over and over again? And would I like to delegate it to somebody else on my team because I don't want to do it anymore? If you can put a tick in all of those boxes, you should absolutely start creating a system for it, because you're going to get a significant ROI by doing so. Now, whether that be in sales, marketing, fulfillment, or administration, as I mentioned, I can't really tell you that, other than to say, for most people who run a small business, the bigger problems tend to be, I'm not making enough money. And the solution to that problem could be because you don't have enough customers, or you got plenty of customers, but you've got so many problems, you got too many fires, and your profit margin is disappearing into the vacuum of mistakes and errors and omissions. So again, each person will have to decide what area in the business that they want to start creating systems for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess it's like the theory of constraints, really, isn't it? Like the wonderful book, The Goal by Goldratt, which I come back to repeatedly. So find your biggest constraint, or where the fires are, and then getting, better at that area is a really good advice. But I like the checklist because that applies to pretty much anything. Does it take over 5 minutes? Do you have to do it repeatedly? Do I want somebody else to take this off my plate? Now, I guess I'm kind of going to ask the same question in sort of the same way, because I know that in a different way, because I know that the reality of getting people to get stuff off their plate and create SOPs and systems is not as straightforward as it should be on paper, in my experience. So let's put it on its head. If somebody's sitting there going, I really want a bunch of stuff off my desk, I hate all this stuff, what should they tackle first?
Again, the answer is going to be, it depends on the problem, on the biggest problem that they're trying to solve. I know when I started my Amazon hybrid agency, and I started mine, so I was an Amazon reseller. I was not a private label seller. But the problem would be kind of similar for both private label and for a reseller, in that you need more products to make more sales. So in the reseller world, you're not making the products, you're establishing relationships with the brand owners. So that is the byproduct, or that is the outcome of more prospecting. So in my case, I built a system that allowed us to really scale up our prospecting. And as a result of that, we were winning accounts every single week. And we got on the Inc. 5000 a couple of years in a row. You can see the Inc. 5000 plaques on the wall behind me. We ranked number 254 and number 622. That was the direct byproduct of the fact that we were probably sending our prospecting productivity was probably 10 to 20x higher than most of our competitors. And that was because A, I'd built a system for it, and then B, I hired low-cost labor, virtual assistants in the Philippines, to work whatever parts of that system that I was unable to automate. So some of it was automated, some of it was manual. In the world of a private label seller, and I was never a particularly successful private label seller, so take all this advice with a grain of salt, but I understand at a high level, the process is, well, there's product research. And if you can break that down into a system, you might find, because it should be a system, it shouldn't just be gut, because if it's gut, you're going to make all sorts of mistakes. You need to have a way to research and a way to quantify and a way to compare competition. So any really proficient private label seller, they've got that down to a science. If that's the case, especially if it's all in their head, because they're really good at it, they need to get it out of their head and they need to put it into documents, so that now that entire process can be broken down into phases, and then you can acquire low-cost labor to execute those phases by following the documentation that you provided. And in doing so, again, your productivity will go through the roof. Now, some people who haven't done this before, Michael, they might object and they might go, well, yeah, but nobody's as good as me. Okay, so let's assume that you're perfect and someone that works for you, if armed with your system that you created, could be 80% perfect. Well, what's 80 times 2? 160. Is 160 bigger than 100? Absolutely it is. So if you had two people doing the work 80% and 80%, their level of productivity will be way higher than yours. And so the quality will be made up for in the quantity. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely do get it. I would say, by the way, that the maths could be worse than that, which is kind of depressing. So somebody might be only 30% as good at you as you at, crunching the numbers and making sure that you select, shortlist possible markets. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, if you hire five of them, they're still going to be more than you, and you're not doing it, because who wants to spend 100 hours a week in front of a spreadsheet with your eyes bleeding, because it's just depressing and boring, having done a load of that for myself, and my clients do the same, and nobody, not many people I know love it, put it that way. So
Correct.
now, another objection that I think is really important to voice, perhaps for the earlier stage, I had two client calls today, one with somebody who's doing, his first getting towards six figures a year, so early stage, and somebody else who's frankly struggling and like has made a handful of sales this month. The latter one asked me not to record the session because she was concerned that I would share, I don't know, that I would have access to sensitive information now. I just want to reassure anyone who ever wants to work with me that I would never reveal sensitive client information anyway. But there was a fear that somehow I'd be capturing something valuable, even though if somebody's doing 4 units a month sales, I'm kind of not inclined to copy their business model. But that struck me that that's like an extreme version of a slight paranoia that people have about documenting things, because they fear going to teach somebody in a lower wage economy in the Philippines maybe to, source products or to research products, and then they're going to run off and do it themselves. So how do we deal with that fear?
That is a belief that is not serving those people. And the reason for that is entrepreneurs, we are very unique, special people. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. There's a reason that the vast majority of people in the world have a job and that they work for somebody else. And that's that they're not capable of being an entrepreneur. They either don't have the money, the resilience, the grit, the ambition. They're missing one or many ingredients. So you could equip somebody, a VA, with all of your systems, and they're still not going to do it, because if they really wanted to be an entrepreneur, they would have been one already. Now, once in a blue moon, could there be an exception to this rule? I suppose it's mathematically possible. But in 12 years of using VAs and exposing all of our systems to those VAs, I never had a single problem. So if that's the issue that's in your head, my advice is simple: get over it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. By the way, I'm glad you're giving the tough love on this one, because I've had conversations like that before. And yeah, the other thing I would say is that if you're hiring somebody in the Philippines on $4 an hour, they probably do not have the money that's required to
No.
most business models, especially not private label. I mean, it just won't happen. And the person I'd be most afraid of is hiring some competent person based in London who's quite entrepreneurial. That would be more likely to be a person who's in a position and has the character to steal whatever you've got going. But yes, I take your point, and so we don't need to overhammer that one, but it's important to get over it. So how do we create this wonderful system then? So we've talked about systems. Oh yes, one other thing that comes up for me, you talked about automation. So when you say system, I presume you mean something that incorporates humans and computer systems or automatic systems. Is that right? I mean, how do you deal with that?
There's not a blanket answer to that. A system could be something as simple as a checklist. For example, I have a system for managing my inbox. I don't do the work. It's not automated. My virtual assistant, or not my virtual assistant, my assistant does it by following this checklist every single day. There's no software other than Gmail, but there's no automations, there's no nothing. So that's a system. But on the other hand, again, system is ambiguous. I've got when someone books a demo with me, certain automations kick in, and then texts go out and emails go out and a Zoom link goes out and reminders go out. That's also a system. So it really just depends on what you're describing. if it's purely like documentation, instead of calling it a system, you could call it a standard operating procedure or an SOP. I think that's fairly clear that those are generally speaking a written set of instructions. And then automation is something that you could potentially layer on top of that. So for example, in Flowster, we have these things called workflows, which are essentially checklists embedded in our software. Now, if you're not using Zapier, for example, there won't be interaction between your workflow in Flowster and any other application. So it's a standard operating procedure. But you can use Zapier to say, oh, when you put a tick in this tick box in Flowster, I want you to do this other thing in this other app that I'm using in my tech stack. Well, it's still a system, but now it's got automation layered on top of the documentation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think what strikes me, and we ought to talk about how to create one, but one thing that strikes me is that I mean, talk to me about this because you work with people all the time. You probably get this right and wrong. My impression is that people get prematurely practical and they worry about software and they kind of start doing what the software will let it them do rather than thinking, what jobs do we need done to get an outcome?
Yeah.
Is that right? And if so, what's the corrective?
That's a hard question to answer with a specific answer because it's no fault of your own, but it's a rather vague question because there's so many use cases or examples of that. So if you can tighten the question up, maybe I could give you an answer that would be valuable, but if not, we should probably skip past it.
Yeah, very well corrected. Yeah, let's say that somebody is indeed wanting to automate their keyword research because they want to expand their product catalog. Let's say they've got, I don't know, 10 products, they're private labeling. So that means, maybe they're selling in the US, so reasonable amount of turnover. Let's say it's 6 figures a year, mid 6 figures, and they want to expand to 20 products within the next year, and they want to outsource their keyword research. What's the next step? How do we start creating that documentation?
Okay, so basically your question is, how do you create systems?
Yeah.
So regardless of whether it's keyword research or whatever, it starts with capturing the current system. So for some people, the system is what we call a habit. It's just in their head. They know how to do it. They've memorized how to do it, and they do it over and over again. For other people, it could be a Loom video or a Google Doc or something. But if there's no documentation of any kind or no content of any kind, the first thing you need to do is capture it. And Sidebar Flowster has a free tool for this called Capture. It's a Chrome extension, and it works beautifully for what I'm about to describe. So capturing it is nothing more than doing the thing and then capturing all of the clicks. Some people will use Loom for this. I'm not a big fan of Loom. Loom, of course, it's going to record your screen. You can talk, you can do the clicks. The reason I'm not a big fan of Loom is because to transform a Loom, so this process has now been captured in Loom, to transform that into documentation, there's actually quite a bit of labor and effort, which is inefficient. Whereas Capture, what it does, it works kind of like Loom, but it doesn't make a video. Instead, it just takes a screenshot every time you click your mouse, which is really what you're trying to accomplish with Loom anyway. And it highlights where you clicked your mouse. And if you type anything in a field, it will capture that. And so the output of our Flowster Capture extension to convert that into documentation is like 1/10 or less of the effort of converting a Loom video into documentation. So to summarize, the first step is who's ever on your team is doing the thing, you need to capture it. Use Loom, stand over your shoulder with your phone, use Flowster Capture, whatever it is, somehow you need to capture it. Then the next thing is you need to convert that, I'll call it raw content, into a procedure that now has enough polish and detail that somebody else on your team could follow it. And so the next step of the situation is you'll just assign this task by providing them the documentation to someone on your team who's never done it before and see how well they do. see how many questions they ask. And ideally, you'll give it to more than one person to see, because you're looking for patterns. Like maybe the one person you give it to is just dumber than a stump, and so they ask you a million questions. Well, that doesn't mean your documentation's bad. In that case, it meant the person that you give it to simply just wasn't that bright. So give it to someone on your team who you know is bright, or reasonably bright, average even, and see how many questions that they ask. So that is one way of creating your systems. Now, some people might say, well, hey, Trent, I need systems for stuff I'm not really sure how to do yet. So in that case, you can't really capture it because you didn't even know how to do it. So then is do a little bit of R&D, which is to say do a little rob and duplicate, or adopting of somebody else's system. And in Flowster, again, we make this super easy. We provide our users with hundreds and hundreds of templates that our team has built and that third parties have built. And you might find a template that's pretty close to what you want, but maybe you use a different piece of software and you want to swap out some of the images or change the procedure. Well, that's fine. They're all customizable, but it's a whole lot easier than starting from zero. And then finally, so as you start to build these SOPs or these checklists, whatever word you'd like to use to describe them, you need to organize them and make them easy to find. Because if you don't do that, then all of your work will be wasted, because your team won't be able to easily access this material. They won't even know that it exists. And so what I would suggest is you organize it into playbooks. So going back to the departments we talked about earlier, you would have a sales playbook. You'd have a product development or product research playbook. You'd have a marketing playbook, a fulfillment playbook. And within those playbooks are all of the individual systems that somebody who works in that department of your company that they would need to tap into to be able to effectively do their job. If you're using Google, use folders. In the case of Flowster, we organized it just like Google. You can put as many folders into Flowster as you want. You can have subfolders of your folders and subfolders of those folders. So you can you can create your playbooks however you would like. We have pre-built playbooks as well. And then there's also, just like Google, there's a search box. So if you don't want to browse through your playbooks, literally just type in, hey, I need to produce a podcast. So I'd type in the word podcast, and voila, oh, there's my system for producing a podcast, or my procedure rather. And then you'd open it up and start following it.
Nice. Yeah, that's really, really good. So, by the way, talking of documentation, if you want to get the notes from today's podcast, go to 10kcollective.com. And I'm tapping away here, or indeed go to Flowster. So I think we probably ought to talk about Flowster because we mentioned it. Obviously, not only are you an expert in documentation, but you've gone so far as to create software that is specially designed to help people with that. So you mentioned the playbooks. I believe you've got an Amazon seller playbook available on Flowster. So tell us a little bit about Flowster and how that helps people solve these problems.
Yeah, we do. So back, this a little history lesson. So originally I built this playbook for me because I had this Amazon reseller agency. We scaled it really quickly. And so we needed procedures for like everything you can think of. So, okay, so we get a new account. We got to ship the product or get it shipped to us, and we've got to check the quantities, and then we got to create or optimize product listings, and then we got to run ad campaigns, and we got to deal with reviews, we got to deal with returns, we got to deal with Amazon account health. We've got to, like literally all of those moving parts. We created documentation for. And then that's actually how Flowster got created. In the early years, we sold millions of dollars worth of that playbook to Amazon resellers under the name Webs. But the Amazon seller playbook is that. Now, am I saying that it is perfect and it has everything you need? No. Everybody's needs are different. Nothing is perfect. But what I am saying is it is a massive jumping off point, because if you sat down to recreate all of there's probably like 80 or 100 SOPs in the Amazon seller playbook, it would take you north of 6 months I mean, there's a massive amount of detail in these procedures. Now, is every single procedure completely up to date every single day? No, because things in the world are constantly changing. Amazon is changing their seller central interface. Helium 10 is changing their interface, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as you go through the playbook, if you're coming into it with the expectations of it was built yesterday and it's 100% perfect, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're coming into the playbook thinking, I'm just looking to like get a big jumping off point, I don't want to start at zero. I want to see what great templates look like. I want to see in the areas of my business I should have them. I'm going into this knowing that they're going to be pretty darn good, but I'm expecting to hit the customize button and make some changes. And maybe I'm going to update some screenshots, or maybe my procedures are a little bit different than the way the Amazon Seller Playbook was built. If you come into the with those expectations, you're going to see, well, this is a hugely valuable asset because it's going to save you hundreds and hundreds of hours from versus starting from scratch. Like just like writing a proposal, who wants to write a proposal from scratch? Give me a good template. I'll spend, an hour customizing it to making it perfect for me, but I don't want to spend 8 hours writing the thing from scratch. And that's the problem that the Amazon Seller Playbook solves, is that it just gives you that huge head start so that you don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. In a way, what you've done is you've outsourced the creation of a fairly viable template already, and then you just got to update it. So it's a recipe, I suppose, isn't it? And like any recipe, you got to adjust it
Yeah.
to your oven, to your personal taste, to your aunt's recipe, whatever. But you don't start from scratch, as you say, just in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, there's huge value in that. I think actually people undervalue documentation in the same way they sometimes overvalue software, because software does specific jobs and it looks pretty, but your documentation could be the backbone of your business, I think, couldn't it? And this is the piece that the mature
Oh,
sellers,
that's
I think, get.
absolutely true.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah,
you'll find that people who are in companies of fewer than 5 employees, they don't value documentation. And ironically, they're the smallest companies, and they're stuck being small for the very reason that they don't value documentation. And then you look at companies with 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 thousands of employees. They all have documentation. So ironically, the reason that they're so big isn't because they created a product that never existed in the world before, or their CEO is as smart as Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. I mean, sure, there's exceptions and there are going to be a few outliers, but the vast majority of those organizations scaled to the level that they're at because the founders and the COOs decided that, hey, we can't have 20 different versions of a chocolate cake around here. We need to have one source of truth. And the only way for us to get that one source of truth is to give our team a recipe so that it turns out the same way every single time. And I say this because for 3 years now, I've been selling this software, and invariably small businesses, it's lost on them. They're like, well, I don't need that. I just need a hack. I just need a shortcut to be able to, do whatever. And unfortunately, those folks who have that mindset, they're going to stay small and broke forever because they're not thinking like a CEO. Like, to quote a book I read this morning, it's called Your Next 5 Moves. It's a really great book. Anybody can start an LLC and print up business cards that say CEO for less than $200. But until you have a few dozen people reporting to you, you're not really a CEO. You're just the founder and the tactician. To really be deserving of the title CEO, you gotta think like one, which means systems.
nice. I like that. Yeah, so there you go. So a warning if you are a small business owner to take the documentation seriously, because the big guys do. And there's a bit of a major hint going on there. As you say, not everyone's Steve Jobs, but they've got a consistency about what they do. And it's scalable, isn't it? You're not going to go crazy. I mean, I think the constraints are either going to be capital or the founder's time, in my experience with the early stage businesses. So
Mm-hmm.
you've only got 168 hours a week like everybody else, and occasionally you might want to sleep. So obviously, the webs thing, as you call it, the Amazon Seller Playbook, is that still available? You said that you used to sell millions of copies of those. Is that still available for people
It
if they want
is.
it?
It is. If
Okay.
people go to floster.app/ASP, I'm pretty sure that that is the link.
Okay.
Let me just double check here. ASP. Yep, that's it. And they can
Okay.
get a free 30-day trial of the Amazon Seller Playbook, and they can suss it out for themselves. But again, I want to reiterate, if you're going into that thing thinking like it's turnkey perfect, was built yesterday and has a procedure for absolutely everything you could ever do, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
But if you go into it thinking, hey, this is going to be a massive jumping off point, it's going to save me hundreds of hours because I don't have to create this stuff from scratch. I just got to tweak and tune and make it my own. You'll be tickled pink.
Amazing. Yeah. Tickled pink. That's a phrase I haven't heard for a while. I thought that was British. Excellent. Yeah. So that sounds going in with realism is important. I know there are sort of easier entries as well to the Flowster, way of doing things in the Flowster universe. So there's the Chrome extension you've mentioned already, which sounds
Yep.
fantastic. I didn't even know about that, which is really ignorant because we've worked together before. So I'm excited to go and check that out.
It's
Actually.
pretty new. Not everybody knows about it. And the
Okay.
page
I
for
feel
that
less
is,
bad then.
if you go to floster.app/capture, that's the landing page for it.
Flowster.app/capture. Amazing. Well, that sounds really worth having. And then I know you've got a free plan, so you can check out, playing with a
Yep.
few templates yourself. And then what's the sort of in between the full-on massive playbook and then the sort of free plan with a few templates? What is there a sort of middle ground for people who want to use the
Oh
Flowster in a less
yeah,
intensive way?
absolutely. I mean, our the free plan will only get you so far, and then our paid accounts are, they're super affordable. They start at what is it? There's minimum of 2 users. It's like, I don't know, like $25 or $30 a month, something like that. So super affordable. And now you can start tapping into our marketplace. So there's, the thing that a new Flowster user has to do to get value from Flowster, it's kind of like, hey, I bought a car, but I didn't put any gas in it. How valuable is the car?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. Right.
valuable at all because it doesn't move. Flowster's the same thing. If you don't either go to the marketplace and get some pre-made templates, of which there are hundreds of them, or use the capture extension to create your own custom stuff, there will be no gas in Flowster and it will be useless for you. And that is the thing that I wish I could just sit on the sales page and tell everyone that's about to sign up for a trial, saying, look, these systems aren't going to build themselves. You got to do the work. But when you do, when you put yourself in a position to buy back your time, and there's nothing more valuable than being able to buy back your time by stopping doing the working in your business and do a lot more of the working on your business. This is what the book E-Myth is about. This is what the book Traction or EOS or all of these books about how to scale your business. They all say the same thing. Build systems, build a team, stop working in the business, start working on your business. Flowster is a very powerful tool to help you do that. But if you don't put any effort into it, it's not going to do any good for you at all. Now, the only other little bow I'll put on that is we did recently launch a Flowster Unlimited plan where we will do unlimited custom SOP creation for you. So if you are someone that has a bit more money than they have time and you don't want to create any of your own stuff, as long as you capture the procedure in some way, shape, or form, Loom, Google Doc, Flowster Capture Extension, we don't care. You can then send that to us and we'll make the polished SOPs custom for you on the unlimited plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine that actually one of the reasons I think people value software over documentation systems is because the promise, I'm not saying it's what it does, but the promise of software that you always buy into, you get excited about. And I've bought many subscriptions we all have. is a very specific outcome with quotes no effort from you, because the computer does
Yeah.
the magic for you. Whereas of course that's not normally how it works, and if it does give you a magic outcome, it may not be what you need, so you have to adjust the output anyway. But I get why people get excited about it. And even, by the way, 7-figure sellers who should know better, always in my experience in a mastermind meeting with, even 8-figure sellers, as soon as you mention a specific app, they're all writing it down. The rest of the time they're tapping on their phones. Well, it's their loss. But I would say that what you're offering is for the people who can afford it, that genuine thing, which is like, here's the raw material, make it work, bye. And that makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense to me, that, if you can afford it, you would want that, because that's the ultimate prize, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been a very popular product since we launched it last
I can
month.
really see that. Of course, for you, it means a lot more work because it's not a software anymore. It's an agency type situation, right? But that sounds really great for the people using it. So now, quick sort of bite-sized episode. Let's talk about hiring and managing, because obviously it's a huge area, but let's see if we can cut it to the chase on this. Documenting is all very well. Some of it can be done by computer systems, amazing. Some of it we might keep for ourselves, but the rest of it implies that we need to have people who are going to do it. So how do you go about this tricky process of finding and hiring people, particularly if it's a virtual assistant, i.e. in an affordable economy?
So we actually have a free template in our marketplace on the process that we use to hire a VA. And we have a huge amount of success. We've been hiring VAs now for 12 years. We almost never have a hiring failure. So rather than just encourage people, they don't even need a Flowster account. They can literally go to the marketplace. There's a link on our homepage. Then they can type in the word hiring. It'll come up, and they can click on preview the SOP, and literally they can just use it right then and there, even without creating a Flowster account. No email address, nothing. So no need to explain that when it's so easy to do. But the other half of the question that you asked is, how do we get it done? Bottom up. So have a culture where, the people that are doing the thing are also the people responsible for creating the documentation to do the thing. Like, to put it in simple terms, why would you ask the owner of the bakery, assuming it was a big bakery, to give you the chocolate cake recipe when the person in the bakery who's cooking the chocolate cakes, they're the ones who should be documenting the chocolate cake recipe, because they're the tacticians that are baking the cake.
Yeah, that does make sense, and that ties entirely with the E-Myth kind of suggestion, which is that you kind of create the company from the top down in terms of an org chart, and then you start the process of getting stuff off your plate from the bottom up. So that's exactly ties in with that philosophy. Great. Well, I know you've got to go to another event. You've got to do a webinar shortly. Any other things that we should have talked about with well, let's talk about the hiring thing a tiny bit more. If you've got any other bits of wisdom, and 12 straight years of great hiring sounds amazing. We should obviously go and check that template out. And I'll just say that I'll put a link from amazingfba.com/hire SOP. I know, let's call it something else. SOP, what was it? Is a hiring SOP.
We call it the virtual assistant hiring process.
Virtual assistant hiring process. All right. Let's call it VA hiring, because otherwise people remember it that on the podcast. So amazingfba.com/VA hiring, which sounds fantastic. And getting SOPs made. Any other sort of thoughts on getting SOPs made and delegating the documentation effectively?
Not really. The only other thing that I would add is that the two things that you need to be aware of as additional benefits of creating these systems and this documentation is, one, when you have a key employee leave, it will be far less painful if you have systems and documentation, because all of your specialized knowledge didn't just walk out the door because you've documented it all. And then whoever replaces that individual will have a significantly easier time coming up to speed, because you don't need job shadowing and a whole bunch of hands-on training. So that the training time and the training expense will be significantly less. Like in our world, onboarding a new VA for us is a piece of cake, because we just add them into Flowster. When we want them to do work, we go to find the correct workflow, we assign it to that VA, and that's it. And then if they have questions, we answer the questions. And then the final and potentially the biggest benefit of making sure that you're documenting your processes is, one day you're going to want to sell your company. And every moderately intelligent investor who might be your buyer, one of the very first questions they're going to ask you is they're going to say, Michael, do you have documented processes? And if you say no, you just took a big haircut on your price, because in their mind, risk just went way up. So they're going to compensate for that risk by saying, okay, I'm going to lower my price by 25%. Or, Michael, you have to hang around for the next year, and I'm going to hold back 30% of the price as an earnout, and you don't get that 30% until a year from now. And suddenly you're like, well, wait a minute, I just wanted to get a check and leave. Well, that option's not available to you. So that's because you didn't document your systems. Whereas if you have a company that the owner is not needed for day-to-day operations, and the team's there and all of the systems are there, that's when you can get a big check and just walk away.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I would say, just it's a broader, to the slightly broader point you made, that early stage business owners often don't value documentation enough. I've seen where somebody was a solopreneur, but really smart, and created a couple of businesses. He sold for 7 figures, which is a fantastic multiple of the revenue, never mind of the profits, because it was a very efficient, high profit business. But my goodness, to your point of not having the right documentation, he's had, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or pounds in this case, held back because of a lack of documentation about some legal stuff and insurance and other such boring things that nobody wants to deal with. But when it means that you've literally got hundreds of thousands of pounds of what is officially your money, but is actually in somebody else's bank account and contingent on you sorting things out, that puts a pretty sharp edge on documentation, doesn't it? Suddenly it's a bit more exciting then. So to your general point about documentation being important, I can't stress that enough. It's not just about operations, critical as that is. As you say, the check at the end of it gets delayed. So listen, lots of fantastic reasons why documentation matters. And your tool is, I've used it myself. I haven't used the screen capture thing. I'm really excited about that, because there are other screen capture softwares out there that people have recommended. And the trouble is, of course, once you've created the raw product, now you've got to put it somewhere. Whereas if you can integrate a system like Flowster with the screen capture software, then you're cooking with gas. So that sounds really great. Any final things that I should have asked you, or that we should have mentioned?
No, I'd say we've pretty much covered everything to do with the tactical aspect of systems and processes and documentation. The only thing I would add is, if you haven't read the E-Myth, or you haven't read, Traction or EOS, go read those books, and they're going to tell you to do what we just told you to do.
Yes, it's not just us making this up. I mean, I'm just some guy in a podcast, and Trent has a vested interest in saying that documentation matters. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Go read the big guys, and they will tell you the same exact thing. There's no question. Yep. And yeah, the most successful business owners I've seen, when I've got to look inside their businesses, people doing, say low 8 figures a year, it's like a Swiss watch. It's incredibly precisely organized. So what you say is absolutely true from my personal experience as well. So listen, great to talk as ever. I'll let you go and get ready for your next webinar, and lovely to have you on. So for anyone who wants to go and check out things, the links, let's just give you a final place to go: amazingfba.com/VA hiring. You don't even need a Flowster account, which is a good, insanely good value. And then if you want to go and get started with the Chrome extension for free, flowster.app/capture. 2 incredibly good starting points. Any other starting points that you think people need to know about?
If they want to try the Amazon Seller Playbook, flowster.app/ASP.
Okay.
And if they want to browse and see the many, many, many templates we have, just go to the home page. Just look at, there's right on the nav bar, there's the word templates. Just click on it.
Amazing. Great. Well, look, thank you so much. Exciting stuff. I think I'm becoming weirdly nerdy about documentation, but I just kind of getting to the point where I feel kind of excited when I see one of my clients in the mastermind really deep dive into this stuff, because I feel like their business is getting onto a different level, and that's a prelude to a much more significant growth and a serious sellable business. So it's exciting stuff. Yeah. So those who get it will get this, I think, and those who don't get it, well, as you said, they're going to struggle. So I think we put the word out there. It's up to you, the listener, to go and implement this stuff. Trent, many, many thanks for coming on the show. It's been fantastic as ever.
Michael, thank you very much for having me back. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the audience for investing some time to listen.
Okay, folks, that's our podcast. If you're watching this on some social media platform, get back to work. But seriously, I mean, if you've got any questions or comments on this topic, not should I start a retail arbitrage business? Neither of us are retail arb experts. We're not going to tell you. But if you've got this question about documentation, please pop it in the comments and Trent or I will try and come back to you. Other than that, thank you so much for being with us live. And once again, Trent, thanks for being with us live as well.